Did Nolan Wells' friend Warren just admit the truth? Crucial interview mistake. Here's what that actually means. Warren Hudson sat down for an interview, one that was supposed to clear his name. Instead, he may have just done the opposite. Because when a body language expert analyzed the footage, she found deception markers on one very specific topic: Nolan Wells's phone. The phone that his parents say had messages deleted. The phone that Warren says no one touched. But here's the question nobody's asking yet. Not whether Warren's lying about touching the phone, but whether he just told on himself without realizing it. Because there's a difference between denying something nobody asked you and denying something you shouldn't know to deny. Think about what that means. Warren Hudson calls himself Nolan's best friend. Like a brother, he said. He was one of the last people with Nolan on Horn Island.
What was your relationship like with Nolan? Who was he to you?
Nolan, I could describe Nolan in a million ways. I mean, Nolan was not just a best friend of me, but he was a brother. I grew up through elementary, middle school, high school, and even our freshman year of college. You know, we talked on the phone all the time. We were really close friends. And I mean, Nolan was like a brother to me. And Nolan lit up every room he walked in. He always had a smile on his face. He always had something good to say. I've never seen Nolan get in an argument with somebody and say bad things about someone. You know, there's a lot of people that talk crap nowadays, and Nolan was never that person. Sweetest soul ever. And I mean, I had a great relationship with Nolan. I've never got in an argument with Nolan. We were super close, and I've never said or will ever have anything bad to say about Nolan Wells.
From that 4-part interview that Warren conducted with Officer Tatum. Let's roll that first clip now, and then we'll talk about our thoughts afterwards.
Nolan, I could describe Nolan in a million ways. I mean, Nolan was not just a best friend of me, but he was a brother. I grew up through elementary, middle school, high school, and even our freshman year of college. You know, we talked on the phone all the time. We were really close friends.
And the first thing that you want to note is his baseline, right? How he's seated in the chair. You know, he's in this kind of low subordinate type of positioning with his hands in between his legs. It's not uncommon. This is a police officer, so he's sitting in front of. Don't look at that as being hiding something with your hands underneath your legs. There is no research to back that up. We're looking for clusters of behavior that are inconsistent with the account, the baseline, and the context. That's how you read body language. They're not one-ups. It's not X plus Y equals Z automatically. It just tells us that there's possible red flags, or there's what we call a point of interest. So with that being said, when I looked at his body language there, and also to his statements, as I shared with you off screen, is that I actually ran every statement that he made, even through Deceptio AI. So I was doing a double check to determine what was the percentage of that statement that was either truthful or not truthful based on statement analysis. So the question was, what was your relationship like with Nolan? And then he went on to describe, that Nolan, I can describe Nolan in a million ways. I mean, Nolan was not just a best friend to me, but he was a brother. So that was really powerful, how he actually internalized that relationship. That statement came up 91% truthful. Okay. So what does that mean? Sometimes they use contracture, sometimes they use odd language, but it doesn't fall into the deceptive category, so it's truthful. So with the sentiment of what I was looking at, it does convey very strong attachment and nostalgia to this relationship, kind of reflecting back on this relationship. So there was a really positive bond between the two of them. So what I was looking at is looking at markers. I'm looking at his blink rate, I'm looking at his head, I'm looking at his eye movement, I'm looking at his body, I'm looking at his face, voice, etc. All that. Those are 6 channels to communicate. We're looking at 6 channels. So when I look at the blink rate, it was very evenly paced in this question. So no spiking, no rapid flutter. So there was no deviation. So that was within his baseline. The head turn, when he turned, he talked. That's also part of being consistent when somebody's talking. No one generally just stares at someone 100%. They kind of break gaze a minute because they're kind of reenacting, reminiscing, and then they come forward and they look straight back at the person. So what I'm looking at that is there was nothing within that head movement in itself. It does not belong in a cluster. There is no cluster here. And also just want to give you a heads up. And I've seen a lot of people just talking about this. Well, I saw him doing this, or his eyes were looking up or to the left, or averting eyes. There is zero research on averting eyes has anything to do with deception. And look it up, do the research. It has been debunked over and over again. Averting eyes is not, it's actually making eye contact. It's actually, lasering in on someone, not averting eyes. Averting eyes can be recalling, thinking, recalling conversation, what have you. And then people just naturally just break away. So his body was very relaxed. He placed his hands between his legs. It's what we call low confidence generally, but this is where I see him, he's in the environment with a police officer, so he feels a bit, subordinate to him. His facial expressions were very neutral. They were relaxed. There was no contempt. There was nothing in his facial expressions that would have given me any indication that there was something that was incongruent. His vocal tone and his pace was very fluid and not fluctuating. So that's something that I'm looking at. I'm looking at, does his voice inflection fluctuate? Does he pause, hesitate? Does he stammer, stutter? Are there any vocal pitch, tone changes, edges, softening when someone's lying? So at that one, we can take off the list, okay? We're going to go into clip 2.
We're going to go into clip 2, where Warren is giving his testimony with regards to the whereabouts of Nolan on the night that he disappeared. So let's play that now.
Nolan was sitting by the boat with that Katie girl, and my buddy yelled for Nolan, get on the boat. We're leaving. The boat's having issues. And no, he didn't say that, but he was panicking. Nolan, get the F on the boat. Get on the boat. And Nolan said, no, I'm staying out here. I'm going to ride in with somebody else. And it's not uncommon to hear, but it's not like my buddy asked him one time. My buddy asked Nolan multiple times to get on the boat. Nolan, get on the boat. Get on the boat. We're leaving. If you're coming, you got to come now.
First of all, he could have said, Katie, but I don't think he knew her. I think that he had maybe just met her or known of her, but he didn't really know her. So it wouldn't be unusual that he would call that Katie girl. Now, with that being said, in statement analysis, when I analyzed his response there, that it came up as 98% truthful. So now we're going to go into his vocal tone. Now, his vocal tone was agitated. I think you'll agree with me. He was a little annoyed. He was agitated. You actually could see on his lip corner raised, right over on one side here, it was raised in a form of scorn. If you slow that video down, you can actually see it. He was pissed. He was pissed off that he was still talking to that Katie girl, and I'm trying to get you on here. So there was that sense of frustration. You could hear the agitation in his voice, and then the hand gestures kind of punctuated what they call batoning or slicing. And when you do that and you're punctuating, your voice is a little bit on the edgier side. That is telling me in also when you consider what he was actually stating. So it was a truthful statement, but he was like, get in here, come now. And then there was like a pause and a hesitation. You may have seen that. Well, what was happening was when he said, get on the boat, and then he started to recall, and he was trying to play almost as if he was like the second person. He was kind of reiterating what he heard. And so he was restructuring what he had heard, and that's why you saw and heard the pause. That's what happened, because it wasn't fluid, right? So what I'm looking at is that it kind of break that fluidity. Why was he doing? Well, because he was trying to recall what he heard, and then he was reconstructing it along the way. So there was a vocal tone that had an edge to it. There was vocal disfluency when he said, get on the boat, which is what I just said. So, and there's also a lot of stress indicators, So you can imagine if you were there, you would have seen that there was a lot of commotion, a lot of chaos that was creating all of this, okay? So that's why you saw that the vocal tone changed. It was more edgy, but the gestures when he was talking and explaining it followed his language. So it was consistent, even though you could see that he was agitated. The agitated came from the actual account of why he was agitated. So we have to look at the congruency, why that happened. So when he was, so he naturally corrects himself also too during it. So he'll be talking and then he kind of backs up and then he'll kind of correct himself. And that's normal with someone that is telling a story truthfully. A truthful story is not linear. It's not like you just kind of throw it out there. This happened, then that happened, then this happened, and that happened. You're going to back up, kind of go to the side, come back. Because natural language, especially when there's trauma or something went on, you're going to jump.
July 4th, 2026. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. 2 days later, his body was found in the water. The official story, according to authorities, was that Nolan drowned. An accident. Tragic, but straightforward. But Nolan's family doesn't believe that. Attorney Ben Crump doesn't believe that. And now, after Warren Hudson's interview with Brandon Tatum, a lot of other people are starting to question it too. Because here's what happened when Warren sat down to tell his side. He denied being involved in Nolan's death. Flat out. That makes sense. That's what you'd expect him to say. Then he denied deleting anything from Nolan's phone. Again, makes sense. Nolan's parents raised concerns publicly that messages had been wiped, so Warren addressed it. But then a body language expert named Susan Constantine watched the footage, and according to TMZ, she said something stood out. When Warren insisted no one touched Nolan's phone, she assessed him as being deceptive. Not about Nolan's death, not about the drowning, about the phone. Susan Constantine made it clear. This doesn't mean she thinks foul play was involved. She even said Warren mostly told the truth. But she thinks he's hiding something about that phone. Now let's sit with that for a second. Why would someone be deceptive about a phone if nothing happened to Nolan except an accidental drowning? What's on that phone that matters? Or more importantly, what was on that phone? That isn't there anymore. Because according to Nolan's parents, Christine Wansley and Elmore Wansley, messages were deleted. And they want to know who did it. And why. Warren Hudson's mother is a Mississippi Chancery Court judge. Her name is Ashley Cole. On July 7th, she released a statement saying Warren was cooperating fully with investigators. She said Warren saw Nolan last around 3 p.m. on July 4th. She denied claims her family was trying to hamper the investigation. But here's where the friction starts. Warren says Nolan chose to stay on Horn Island, that the boat they came on started taking in water. A bilge pump issue, he said. Emergency situation. And that Nolan decided to stay behind with a girl, while Warren and the others left to save the boat. But the girl, who spoke to Nolan's mother, said her interaction with Nolan was brief. More of a hey and bye type situation, according to reports. Not someone Nolan stayed behind for. Attorney Ben Crump highlighted this contradiction. He said the boys on the boat claim Nolan was staying to talk to a girl, but the girl says Nolan told her he was going back to the boat. They're not saying the same thing, Crump said. One of them is telling the truth. One is not. We have to get to the bottom of that. So notice this. Warren's story is that Nolan chose to stay. The girl's story is that Nolan was going back to the boat. Those two accounts cannot both be true. Which means someone is either mistaken or lying. And if someone's lying, we have to ask why. Now let's talk about the interview itself. Warren Hudson did this interview with Brandon Tatum. Tatum is a conservative podcaster, former police officer, runs a show called The Officer Tatum Show. Tatum says he had no prior relationship with Warren's family, that Judge Ashley Cole reached out to him, and he agreed to do the interview. The interview was released on July 21st. In it, Warren describes Nolan as a brother, says they begged him to get on the boat, that Nolan was intoxicated, that everyone left their phones on the boat to protect them from the ocean, that it was common, normal. Warren also said he never saw someone in the water that day with their phone in their hand, scrolling or taking pictures. He painted a picture of a chaotic scene. Thousands of people on Horn Island, multiple boats, massive crowds, drinking, partying, 4th of July celebration. In that environment, Warren's saying, it makes sense Nolan didn't have his phone. It makes sense things got confusing. It makes sense nobody realized something was wrong until hours later. But here's what doesn't make sense. According to Warren's own timeline, he got an agitated phone call around 12:30 a.m., July 5th, hours after they'd last seen Nolan. Then about 30 minutes later, Warren says, A group of 10 people or so slammed open the door to the house where they were staying, clearly freaking out because they hadn't heard from Nolan. Warren says he stepped outside with a guy he knew from high school, and that guy told him he thought Nolan probably just crashed on someone's couch. Warren agreed. He didn't go looking. He didn't panic. He thought Nolan was fine. But think about the mechanics of that for a second. If your best friend, someone you call a brother, is missing on an island, after a day of drinking, surrounded by water with dangerous currents, and a group of 10 people shows up at your door in the middle of the night, freaking out because they can't find him, would you assume he's just sleeping on someone's couch? Or would you start searching immediately? Warren says he initially thought the search party was overreacting. Those are his words. Overreacting to a missing teenager on an island at night. After drinking, that's the first friction point in Warren's own account. The second friction point is the phone. Nolan's parents say messages were deleted. Warren denies it, says no one touched the phone. But body language expert Susan Constantine says he showed deception markers when he said that. Now let's be clear about what body language analysis is and isn't. It's not a lie detector. It's not admissible in court as proof of anything. It's an assessment based on micro-expressions, body movements, verbal cues. Susan Constantine is a certified expert. She's testified in court cases. She trains law enforcement. But her assessment of Warren doesn't prove he's lying. It indicates she believes he may be withholding information, specifically about Nolan's phone. So the question becomes, if Warren is withholding information about the phone, what could that information be? And why would it matter? One possibility. Someone did access Nolan's phone, and Warren knows who. Or Warren accessed it himself, and he's not admitting it because it looks bad, even if the reason was innocent. Another possibility. Warren knows messages were deleted, but he didn't do it, and he's protecting whoever did. A third possibility. Warren genuinely believes no one touched the phone, but his body language reflects anxiety or stress about the topic, because he knows how bad it looks that messages are missing. Each of those scenarios leads to a different conclusion, but they all share one thing in common. They all suggest Warren knows more than he's saying. Whether that knowledge is about who touched the phone, or what was on it, or why it mattered enough for someone to delete evidence, we don't know yet. But the fact that a trained expert flagged his statements about the phone in an interview where he otherwise appeared mostly truthful is something worth examining. Now let's talk about what we know from official sources. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter told ABC News, during the week of Nolan's disappearance, that from what the department understood at the time, Nolan chose to stay on the island. That tracks with Warren's account. But here's what changed. Attorney Ben Crump's team ordered an independent autopsy, conducted by forensic pathologist Dr. Roger Mitchell. The autopsy was performed July 10th in Washington, D.C. The report was created July 19th. At the NOC National Convention, Crump announced the findings. Nolan Wells' cause and manner of death are undetermined. Pending investigation. The date of death is also unknown. That's a significant departure from the initial ruling, which suggested straightforward drowning. Dr. Mitchell couldn't determine if there were bruises or abrasions on Nolan's body, because by the time the second autopsy was conducted, the body was too decomposed. But what he could say is this. The cause and manner of death cannot be conclusively determined from the physical evidence available. That doesn't mean foul play, but it also doesn't rule it out. It means the answer is still open. Which brings us back to Warren Hudson and the interview mistake. Because here's what happens when you sit down for a public interview, especially when you're trying to clear your name. Every word you say gets analyzed. Every claim you make gets fact-checked. Every detail you offer gets compared to other accounts. And if there's a contradiction, people notice. Warren said in the interview that it was common for everyone to leave their phones on the boat, that he never saw anyone in the water with their phone. But multiple people on social media have posted photos and videos from Horn Island that day, taken in the water, on their phones. So either Warren's memory is selective, Or he's trying to justify why Nolan didn't have his phone, in a way that doesn't match the reality of what other people were doing. That's not proof of anything criminal, but it is a credibility problem. Because if Warren's wrong about something as basic as whether people had their phones in the water, what else might he be wrong about? Or what else might he be shaping to fit a narrative? This is where the careful discipline of covering an active case matters. Everything I just laid out is based on documented statements, expert analysis, and family accounts. None of it is speculation dressed as fact. But here's what we can say with certainty. Warren Hudson gave an interview to defend himself. In that interview, a body language expert identified potential deception around one very specific claim, that no one touched Nolan's phone. Nolan's family believes messages were deleted from that phone. And Warren's story about why Nolan stayed on the island contradicts the account given by the girl he allegedly stayed for. Those are the friction points, and they're not going away, whether Warren made a mistake in that interview, or whether he revealed something he didn't mean to. Depends on what comes next. Because this case is still open. The cause and manner of death are undetermined. The investigation is ongoing. And the phone, the one Warren says no one touched, might be the key to understanding what really happened to Nolan Wells. So let's talk about what happens when someone denies something before they're asked. In investigative interviews, there's a concept called preemptive denial. It's when a person volunteers information to deny involvement before anyone has directly accused them of that specific thing. Former FBI agent Joe Navarro has written extensively about this. He says when someone jumps ahead of the conversation to deny something that hasn't been brought up yet, it often indicates consciousness of guilt. Not always, but often enough that investigators pay attention. Now think about Warren's interview again. Brandon Tatum didn't start the conversation asking about the phone. He asked Warren to tell his side of the story. Warren could have talked about the boat, the crowds, the search, the grief. Instead, early in the interview, he made sure to say no one touched Nolan's phone. That's a choice, and it's worth asking why he made it. One explanation is that Warren knew the phone was a major point of contention. The family had already publicly raised concerns about deleted messages, so Warren addressed it head-on. That's a reasonable strategy. Get out in front of the accusation. But here's the other explanation. Warren addressed it because he knows something about that phone. And the denial wasn't just strategy. It was damage control. We don't know which one is true yet, but we know this. Susan Constantine, who's trained in forensic statement analysis, who's worked with law enforcement for decades, flagged that specific denial as deceptive. Not the whole interview, just that part. Which means something about Warren's body language, his word choice, his delivery, triggered red flags. Now let's bring in what forensic psychologist Dr. Joni Johnston said about cases like this. Dr. Johnston wasn't speaking about Nolan's case specifically, but she's discussed similar situations in interviews where a key piece of evidence, like a phone, becomes the center of an investigation. She explains that digital evidence is critical in modern cases because phones don't lie. They show who texted who, when, and what was said. They show location data, call logs, app usage. If someone deletes messages from a victim's phone, the question investigators immediately ask is why. What was in those messages that needed to disappear? And Dr. Johnston says the answer usually falls into three categories. 1. The messages incriminate someone directly. They show a fight, a threat, a plan, evidence of what really happened. 2. The messages contradict the story someone is telling. They show the victim was planning to leave, or was scared, or didn't make the choice the witness claims they made. 3. The messages reveal a relationship dynamic that someone wants hidden. Jealousy, conflict, betrayal, something that creates a motive. In Nolan Wells' case, we don't know what was deleted, if anything was deleted, but the family believes it was. And Warren's denial, according to an expert, shows potential deception. So let's separate the questions here. Question 1. Were messages actually deleted from Nolan's phone? That's a factual question that digital forensics could answer. If law enforcement has the phone, And if they've conducted a full extraction, they would know. Question 2. If messages were deleted, who did it? That's an investigative question. It could be Warren. It could be someone else in the group. It could even be Nolan himself, before he died. Though the family clearly doesn't believe that. Question 3. If Warren didn't delete anything, why does his body language suggest deception when he denies it? That's the psychological question. And it's the one that makes this interview a potential mistake. Because even if Warren is telling the truth, even if he never touched that phone, his delivery made people doubt him. And in a case where public perception matters, where the family is fighting for a real investigation, doubt is dangerous. Notice this. Warren's mother, Judge Ashley Cole, put out a statement saying Warren was cooperating fully. But as of late July, according to attorney Ben Crump, Warren and the other boys on the boat had not been fully interviewed by law enforcement. Crump said investigators told him they needed to speak with those witnesses, but it hadn't happened yet. So when Judge Cole says Warren is cooperating, and Crump says he hasn't been fully interviewed, there's a gap. Either cooperation means something different to both sides, or the statement was meant to shape public opinion, before the investigative process caught up. That's not an accusation. It's an observation about timing, and about how families on both sides of a tragedy often speak publicly to control the narrative, before the facts are fully known. But here's what we can't ignore. Warren went on a podcast with a host who has a specific audience: conservative, pro-law enforcement, skeptical of racial justice narratives. That's not a neutral choice. Ben Crump is known for representing black families in cases where they believe their loved ones were failed by the system. By choosing Brandon Tatum's show, Warren positioned himself in opposition to that framework, whether intentionally or not. And that matters, because this case has already become polarized. Some people believe Nolan drowned accidentally, that his friends are being unfairly targeted, that race is being injected into a tragedy. Other people believe Nolan's death is being covered up, that his friends know more than they're saying, that his family deserves real answers. And Warren's interview didn't bridge that gap. It deepened it. Because now one side sees a grieving friend telling his truth, and the other side sees a potential suspect making mistakes under pressure. Both can't be right, but both are watching the same interview and drawing completely opposite conclusions. So let's go back to the central question from earlier. Not whether Warren's lying about touching the phone, but whether he just told on himself without realizing it. Here's why that question matters. If Warren is innocent, if he genuinely had nothing to do with Nolan's death, and he never touched the phone, then this interview was a massive strategic error, because he gave people a reason to doubt him on national media, analyzed by an expert, in a case that's already under intense scrutiny. But if Warren knows something he's not saying, then this interview was an even bigger mistake, because he locked himself into a story, on the record. And if evidence later contradicts that story, everything he said becomes ammunition. Think about what that means for this case going forward. Warren can't walk back his statements now. He said no one touched the phone. If phone records or forensics show someone did, he's either lying or mistaken, and neither looks good. He said Nolan chose to stay on the island. If witnesses contradict that, he's either lying or mistaken. Same problem. So whether Warren made a mistake depends entirely on what the evidence shows. And we don't have all of that yet. But what we do have is enough to know this. The interview raised more questions than it answered. And in a case where Nolan Wells's family is demanding transparency, more questions is the last thing Warren should have created. Now let's talk about what Nolan's family actually wants. Because that's what this is really about. Christine Wansley, Nolan's mother, has been clear. She's not accusing anyone of murder. She's not demanding arrests without evidence. She's asking for a thorough investigation. She wants to know what happened to her son. She wants the truth, whatever that truth is. At the NOC convention in Las Vegas, she said this: she wants justice. She wants accountability. She wants the people who were with Nolan that day to tell the whole truth, Attorney Ben Crump echoed that. He said the family isn't jumping to conclusions, but they also aren't accepting a conclusion that doesn't match the facts. The independent autopsy showed the manner of death is undetermined. That means drowning hasn't been ruled in or ruled out. It means the investigation should still be active, and the family wants law enforcement to treat it that way. Jackson County Sheriff's Office has said they're continuing to investigate. As of early August, no charges have been filed. No arrests have been made. The case remains open. But here's where the legal reality gets complicated. Without a determined cause of death, it's hard to build a criminal case. Even if investigators believe something happened to Nolan, they need evidence that rises to probable cause. They need to show not just that someone lied, but that someone committed a crime. And right now, publicly at least, that threshold hasn't been met, which is why the phone matters so much. If messages were deleted, that's evidence of consciousness of guilt. It's not proof of murder, but it's proof that someone tried to hide something, and that gives investigators a thread to pull. So the legal status right now is this. Nolan Wells died on or around July 4th, 2026. His body was recovered from the water near Horn Island, Mississippi. The initial findings suggested accidental drowning. An independent autopsy conducted by Dr. Roger Mitchell determined the cause and manner of death are undetermined. No one has been charged. No one has been named a suspect. Warren Hudson and the others on the boat that day are considered witnesses, not defendants. But the family believes those witnesses aren't telling the full truth. And a body language expert believes at least one of them showed deception about a very specific detail. So the case sits in this strange space, legally unresolved, publicly contested, with both sides waiting for the next piece of evidence that either confirms the official story or blows it apart. Nolan's family held a vigil for him in mid-July. Hundreds of people showed up, wearing blue, Nolan's favorite color. They released balloons. They shared memories. They demanded answers. Christine Wansley stood in front of that crowd and said she wouldn't stop fighting, not for revenge, but for truth, for her son, who she says was funny, smart, kind, who loved his family, who had his whole life ahead of him, and who deserves better than a conclusion that doesn't add up. That's the emotional weight of this case, not in what the narrator feels, but in what Nolan's mother is living through, every single day, not knowing what really happened to her child, and being told by some people that she should just accept it and move on. But how do you move on when the story doesn't make sense, when your son's friends won't talk to investigators fully, when messages are missing from his phone, when an independent expert says the cause of death can't be determined? You don't. You keep asking questions, and you hope someone finally tells the truth. So let's come back to where we started. Did Nolan Wells' friend Warren just admit the truth? Crucial interview mistake. Here's what we know for certain. Warren Hudson sat down for an interview. In that interview, he denied touching Nolan's phone. A body language expert analyzed that denial and flagged it as deceptive. Warren's account of why Nolan stayed on the island contradicts the girl's account. Nolan's family believes messages were deleted, and the independent autopsy says the manner of death is undetermined. Those are facts. Here's what we don't know yet. Whether Warren actually touched the phone, whether messages were actually deleted, what those messages said, if they existed, whether Nolan's death was an accident or something else, whether anyone will be charged. But here's what the interview revealed. Whether Warren meant to or not, he created doubt. In a case where his credibility is everything, he denied something in a way that made an expert question him, and he locked himself into a story that might not hold up under scrutiny. So was it a mistake? If he's innocent, yes. If he's guilty, yes. Either way, that interview changed the trajectory of this case. Because now the focus isn't just on what happened to Nolan. It's on what Warren knows about it, and whether he just told on himself, without even realizing it. Christine Wansley said something in one of her interviews that stays with you. She said she keeps Nolan's room exactly the way he left it, because she's not ready to let go, not until she knows the truth. Not until someone looks her in the eye and tells her what really happened to her son. That's what this case is about. Not theories, not speculation, not taking sides. A mother who wants answers, and a friend whose interview might have just made that harder to ignore. We'll keep following this case until there are real answers, not conclusions that are convenient, but answers that match the evidence. If this case affected you, if you think Nolan's family deserves the truth, stay with us, because this story isn't over, and the next piece of evidence could change everything. Now that you've heard what the body language expert said about Warren's denial, what stands out to you most? Does it look like panic, or does it look like someone trying to stay ahead of a story? That's starting to unravel.